To TWOW people, TWOW 17B is coming tomorrow. Hi, so I have to apologize for a few things. The first one is calling this simulation Evolvio, as in .io. See, the simulation was never meant to be an interactive online game like, Slitherio or Agario. So I can see why there's the confusion that like, oh, why can't I play this game if I go to the URL? There's like no server there. The thing was, this game was originally going to be called Evolution Map, but then after playing this game I realized how similar it looked to Agario in that you're trying to be as big as possible by collecting mass on the ground as well as from other creatures. And I thought, well, if this is so similar to Agario, then maybe to attract Agario fans I should call it a similar name. Well, not just to attract the fans, but also because it just makes sense. So that's the only reason why it's called Evolvio, to be similar to Agario, but it's not an interactive online game. Second, in the last video I quabbled on and on about some very minute details, and I made some things really complex, or I made them sound complex, like reproduction. I was talking about it for like 5 or 10 minutes, right? But really it boils down to 3 simple rules. Above 0, initiate birth. Between -1 and 0, willing for birth, and below -1, not willing. That's it. So you know what? I'm tired of all talk and no walk, so let's actually show the evolution once and for all. So we're gonna zoom out and just run it for as long as possible. Okay? Come on, let's do this. Reset zoom and now time lapse, go! Right now, we're 1,177 years into our evolution, and let's see how the creatures have evolved. We can see that most creatures are either yellow or black. And they have very long names, but how is their behavior any different? Well, let's take a look at... Well, did you see that? Aceluo? When it hits water, it speeds up. Now, why would it choose to do that? Well, if you think about it, swimming takes a lot of energy. So the longer you spend on water, the more energy you're losing in order to keep yourself afloat. So if you ever hit water, you want to minimize the amount of time you're on water. How can you do that? By moving really fast forward, because then you'll likely hit a landmass much sooner. So these creatures, they've learned to go faster if they ever see water underneath them. In addition, I think this is just a lucky coincidence, but it also turns out that pale land, which is very unfertile, also returns a high blue value because it's high in every color. So when a creature hits pale land, it also goes fast. Which also makes sense because if you're on pale land, you won't be eating anything, so you should get out of there soon. So you can see creatures are doing that pretty much across the board. See, some of them are drowning in the water, which means that it's still dangerous to take the journey. But doing the journey fast is always better than doing the journey slow. However, on land, since the faster you're moving, the less efficiently you'll eat, creatures will move slowly to be able to eat as much as possible. It's only once they leave the landmass that they go fast. We can see from the list on the right that the oldest creature is 45 years old, and creatures don't tend to get over 30, which means that they live slightly shorter than humans. Also, I think it's very cool that you can use a creature's name to see its heritage. By sorting from Z to A, we can see all the creatures at the very end of the alphabet list. These start with YP, and they're all white, because they all descended from the same ancestor, probably. So there's Yip Top Tomb and Yip Tom Tomb, and they're all in the southern half of the world, so it's a very southern thing to be white. Oh my gosh, I hope I don't stir up any race relations. And finally, we can sort by generation to see that the highest generation creature is Ian Fairfez with a generation of 594, which means that if you look up its family tree, there will be 594 levels. And the lowest generation is Leofurid, which is generation 551, which means they're all pretty close in generation actually. That's pretty interesting. I could imagine a mass extinction could cause something like that because then they would all have similar descendants. Another interesting trait is that all the rocks got pushed into the ocean because the creatures spend so much time on land. Now some people wanted me to make it so rocks sink in the ocean, but you know what? I only have so much time in the day, so I can't do that quite yet. Now that over 1500 years have passed, let's see how the creatures have changed. One big thing I noticed is that a ton of blue creatures have spawned, and I think it might have to do with the fact that blue is also the color of water, which means that if any creature collides with a blue creature, it should start running really fast. Actually, I'm not seeing that happen. I think that's because when creatures are looking with their eyes, most of them are just looking directly underneath them. So let's look at this creature. Yeah, V distance is negative 0.6, which means that, well, it caps off at a minimum of 0, so it's just going to look directly underneath itself at a distance of 0. So actually, these creatures can't even look at other creatures because they repel other creatures. So in that case, I don't know why all these creatures are blue. There's no point in having different colors if no one else can see them. Perhaps it's just like genetic drift, you know, when the population gradually changes even though there's no advantage or disadvantage to it. So I would say in the last 200 years, the color diversity of the creatures has gone down a lot. Like, I think there was a time when there were 6 or 7 very distinct groups of different colors, and now, well, there still are creatures of every color. Like there's pink, black, red, flashing, yellow. I guess I don't see any yellow, but green, and so on. Blue is definitely the majority, and that there was no majority a few hundred years ago. I hope creatures eventually learn to look ahead of themselves, because then creatures will be able to see each other, and that will add interesting new behaviors. Also, vision lagging 1 frame behind the creatures is really clear when you look at them move really fast over water. Oh well. Okay, by generation 3200, the creatures have all become red, pink, or blue, which is pretty cool because there was a time when they were all blue. So we've got a little bit more diversity again. Also, when I go back to editing the code, I need to fix this population graph. I mean, this vertical scaling is just out of whack. I cannot read any of these buttons down here. But that's also pretty cool because it indicates that the creatures can now get up to a population of over 600 with the energy they've been given, whereas before they could only sustain around 300 creatures, which means they're about twice as efficient as they used to be. Another behavior that's evolved is, in order to avoid being cheated into giving birth, all creatures have a very, very low birth number. You can see it's negative 255, but creatures need to reproduce somehow, so eventually you need to get that number preferably above negative 0, or 0 I guess. So they do this weird blinking thing where they just get wilder and wilder if they want to give birth, and eventually it'll happen. This guy's not big enough to do it. See, look at that. Sim Kambao blinked to indicate that they were giving birth. I'm not sure why blinking colors is also necessary to give birth, but that's just what happens. Oh, that is so strange. Every single node is all 0 except for this one node here that's 1. That seems to be controlling everything. But it's still very interesting that all of these nodes in the hidden layer have been set to 0 except for, well, this one, and this one. I noticed that when creatures go over water, this node up here gets turned up to 1, which makes them go really fast. And you can see that by, click on this one, see, it goes up to 1. So the brain has at least one node that changes based on conditions. I wonder if the other ones are always 0 or if they're being used for other stuff, because I haven't been able to see it yet. Yeah, but let's keep going and see what happens at like 5,000 generations. Or years, 5,000 years. So last video, I forgot to explain what's so important about the const node in the brain. Well, when nodes sum up the values of all the axons feeding into it, the weights of those axons pretty much tell the node how important that connection is. 1 is a strong positive connection, negative 0.2 is a weak negative connection, and 0 is no connection. However, what does a node do if all the inputs are 0? 0 multiplied by anything is also 0, so originally, that node would have to return 0. But sometimes you want a default value, such as accelerating forward at 0.1 even if there's no stimulus. The only way to bring about that 0.1 is by bringing in the const node, a node that always returns 1, so that other nodes can multiply that with weights to have a default value of something else. That's all it is, a constant. Also, after recording this vid, I discovered a huge bug that almost broke this simulator. Okay, it did break this simulator. If creatures violently vomit, with a vomit mass greater than its body weight, that huge vomit mass will all be placed on the ground and the creature will die. Suddenly, that's a ton of free energy that popped out of nowhere. And since there are no limits, a creature could vomit trillions of body masses onto the ground in one frame right before dying. That caused some creatures, even in this video, to get super huge, and cause disturbances you might even be able to see in the population graph. Luckily, that's all fixed now. But wow, what an embarrassing bug. So I let it run overnight, and now we're 12,000 years in, so let's see how they're doing. That's too much. So first off, not even mentioning the creatures, I noticed that all the rocks seem to have moved to this part. For the longest time I saw them collecting right here because it's the biggest body of water, but now they're all over here and I don't really know why. Looking at the creatures though, they've gone from being red to black again. Again, color doesn't really mean much because they're still not using their vision for anything. And their main behavior of just going really fast when they're on top of anything that can't really give them food pretty much stayed the same for the last 11,000 years. So not much change. Now you might be disappointed that the results of this evolution simulator are so boring. The reason for that is because they're putting their vision point right in the center of them, so they can see exactly what the color of whatever land they are on is. And I think for interesting stuff to happen, they have to look at the world around them, outward. But since they're too scared to do that, that's not happening. So when I run this again later, I'm going to make it so the minimum vision distance is going to be their body radius, so they're at least looking on the surface of themselves, and maybe that'll encourage them to look outward into the world. And besides, in reality, you can't look in the center of your head, because it's solid. So that'll come in the next video, when I also add a completely new feature that's going to make all these past Evolvio videos seem like the Stone Age, okay? It's going to change everything. These creatures have not experienced an ice age for the whole 12,000 years they've existed, but I'm going to bring about one just to lower the population a bit. So let's go like that, and the population will start to fall. So the population is starting to fall because there's so few oh my god. Oh god, okay, they're all dead. They're like all dead. Let's bring it back up. Anyway, the reason I did that was to see what the generation number of the creatures is, and I couldn't because the graph was covering it up. So the highest generation creature is generation 3017. That's pretty cool. And then the lowest generation, well, that's because of when it hit 60, so that one doesn't really count. Is probably this guy. Generation 2984. 800.